Over the last couple of videos, the Kindle ecosystem has come up a lot. First with the older Kindles losing support, and then again in my last video about how buying a digital book usually means buying a license to read it, not owning it like a physical book. And the comments received in those videos have been quite interesting to read. Some people said this is exactly why you should leave Kindle and switch to Kobo. Others said Kindle is too locked down or that digital books are the problem, full stop. Now, to be fair, there's a lot of truth and wisdom to be read in these comments, but I also think there's a bit of overreaction. So in this video, I want to ask a simple question. Is Kindle still worth sticking with, or should you move to something else? Because maybe, despite all that Amazon have decided to do recently, Kindle is still the best option for a lot of readers, just not for everyone. Hey folks, welcome back to the Weekly Spark and thank you for tapping play. If we start with the Kindle itself, I think it's important to be honest why it's so widely used, because it isn't just brand loyalty or habit. The experience is very straightforward. For mainstream readers, Amazon is still the most familiar place to buy ebooks. You open the device, you search for a book, and usually it's right there. You buy it, and within a few seconds it drops straight onto your Kindle, ready to read. Everything is handled in the background, and you don't really have to think about how any of it works. And then on top of that, you've got WhisperSync working across your Kindle, your phone, your tablet, and even your browser on your computer if you want it. So you can read your Kindle at home, pick up your phone later, and carry on from exactly the same place. And let's not forget Send to Kindle, which is one of the easiest ways to get your own documents onto a device without having to plug anything in or worry about formats too much. If what you want is a reliable, low-friction reading experience where everything just, works, Kindle does that extremely well. And for a lot of people, that's more important than anything else. There is a trade-off here, and it's very real, and it's worth understanding it properly rather than just brushing past it. Let me remind you quickly what I said in my last video. When you buy a Kindle book, you're not buying it in the same way you would a physical book. You're not getting a file that you can just move around, store wherever you like, and keep completely independent. What you're actually buying is access to that book inside Amazon's system. That means your books are tied to your account. They sit within that ecosystem, and your access to them depends on that system continuing to function and support the device you're using. And that's not just a theoretical point either. We've already seen how old devices can lose support over time, how books can get removed or updated without you or the writer's permission, which is what kicked off this whole conversation in the first place. A lot of people in the comments of these videos immediately jump to, well, this is just big companies being greedy or corporate control, and also Jeff Bezos got quite a mention along with certain derogatory words in relation to him. But I think that's all a bit too simplistic, if I'm honest, because the reality is this model is what makes the whole thing work the way it does. The instant delivery, the syncing across devices, the fact that you can pick up your phone and carry on reading exactly where you left off, all depends on everything sitting inside a controlled system. So it's not just about companies locking things down for the sake of it. It's the trade-off that comes with that level of convenience. And that's what this comes back to. The real question isn't whether Amazon and their Kindle products are good or bad. It's whether you're comfortable with that arrangement. Are you happy to trade a bit of control for something that's easier and more polished to use? And for most folks, especially people who aren't particularly techie and don't know their EPUB from their EZW3 or even KFX, the answer is probably yes. They just want a book. They want to read it and not think about file formats or ecosystems. For those of you who do care about that side of things, this is where the conversation gets more interesting, because when people say Kobo is more open than Kindle, they're usually talking less about the store itself and more about how each device handles your files. One of the areas where this discussion tends to get a bit muddled is around file formats, especially EPUB, so it's probably worth clearing that up. Kindle now accepts EPUB files as well as PDFs, but the key detail is how it handles them. When you send an EPUB to your Kindle or a PDF using Send to Kindle, the file doesn't just land on the device and read as is. It gets uploaded to Amazon, gets converted into a Kindle format, and then it's delivered back to your device as part of your library. So when you open that book, you're not technically reading the original file anymore. You're reading Amazon's version of it, which is why everything works properly in terms of syncing, highlights, notes, and so on. A lot of folks mentioned Calibra in the comments of my 2 previous videos, so it's probably worth briefly covering that here for those of you not in the know. Calibra is basically a piece of software that lets you manage your own ebook library, convert between formats, and send books to your devices manually. So if you're comfortable using something like that, you can take a lot more control over your files. But, and this is the important bit, that's not how most people use a Kindle. Most people are not sitting there managing a library of files, converting formats and sideloading books. They're just buying a book, tapping it and reading it. So yes, tools like Calibra exist, and for some people they're brilliant, but they also add more steps, more complexity, and a completely different way of using your device. It comes back to that same trade-off. If you compare that with something like Kobo, it handled things a bit differently. Kobo supports EPUB natively, so you can just drag and drop an EPUB file onto the device and it'll read that file directly. There's no conversion step happening in the background, and you're not having to route it through a central system in the same way. And that's really what people mean when they say Kobo is more open. Not that it doesn't have its own store or ecosystem, because it does. But when it comes to your own files, it behaves more like a traditional file-based device. So if you do start looking beyond the Kindle, what are the realistic alternatives? Well, Kobo is the obvious one, and for many readers it's probably the most straightforward alternative to consider. Still gives you a proper store and a fairly clean experience, but it's more flexible with formats like EPUB and a bit less restrictive when it comes to handling your own content. Then you've got Calibra, which is slightly different because it isn't an alternative device. It's more of a way to take extra control if you want to keep using Kindle but manage some of your own ebook files more directly. It can help organizing books, converting formats, and sending files to your Kindle, usually over USB. Now, I know some folks will immediately say people use Calibra with extra tools to remove DRM as well. And yes, I know that happens, but I'm not endorsing it because it gets into a legal grey area very quickly, and it's not something I want to walk through here. The point I'm making is Calibra itself doesn't really change what the Kindle ecosystem is. It gives more technical users another way to manage their own files, but for most people I would suggest that's not how they want to handle a Kindle. Books takes a completely different approach by running Android. That means you can install the Kindle app, the Kobo app, library apps, and pretty much anything else you want, all on one e-ink device. On paper, no pun intended, that sounds like the ideal solution because you're not locked into one system and you've got a lot of flexibility. But in practice, it can feel more complex. There are more settings to deal with, more decisions to make, and the apps don't always feel like they were made for e-ink because the reality is they're Android apps designed for tablets with LCD or OLED screens. For some people, books tablets lose that focused, distraction-free feel that makes e-ink devices appealing in the first place. And then there are brands like Pocketbook, which lean even further into file support and openness. But again, you're moving away from the polished mainstream experience that something like Kindle gives you. When you strip all of this back, it really comes down to what you value most in your reading experience. If you want something simple, reliable and easy to use without thinking about it too much, Kindle is still very hard to beat. If you want to stay with Kindle but take more control over your own files, Calibra may be part of the answer, as long as you're happy with the extra effort. If you care more about using standard formats like EPUB more freely and not being tied quite so closely to one system, then something like Kobo starts to make more sense. And if you want maximum flexibility, multiple apps and full control over how everything works, then you're probably looking at something like Books, with the understanding that it may not feel quite as smooth day to day. So I wouldn't tell everyone to leave Kindle. I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think it's particularly helpful either. But I also wouldn't ignore the trade-offs, because they are very real. And once you understand those trade-offs properly, you're in a much better position to decide what works for you, rather than just reacting to whatever the loudest voices in the comments are saying. If you've moved away from Kindle or you're thinking about it, I'd genuinely be interested to hear how you found it, especially over a longer period of time. I'm thinking about buying a Kobo and testing it out over on my review channel, The Spark, so I'd be interested to know which one you think I should buy. If you've spotted any Kindle, e-ink, iPad or related tech stories you think are worth talking about, do let me know in the comments. As always, a like would be lovely, and subscribing means you won't miss the next episode. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by summer, so if you could play your part, that would be really appreciated. And if you'd like to support the channel a little further, you can buy me a digital coffee using the QR code that's been on the screen throughout this video, or use a link in the description. And if you'd like to watch my previous video about Amazon culling older Kindles and my video letting you know that you might not own that digital book you just bought, you'll find those just here. Anyway, thanks for watching or listening. I'm Mark from the Weekly Spark, and I'll see you again in the next one.